Crime and Crime Again is a true crime podcast containing subject matter that may be graphic or disturbing. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome back, everyone. I told you I wouldn't be gone forever. I was away for a few months, just to take a break and regroup, and I had some other things I was working on that I am also still working on. But mostly, I just kind of needed a break for a little while. I also took a bit of a break from social media, or at the very least, my social media time greatly decreased. But I am back, and I have been preparing some episodes for a while now, so I am excited to get those out there for you. I know that for the last few months while I've been away, people have still been listening and leaving reviews and ratings, and I just wanted to say thank you so much. Thank you for every listen and every share and every review and every comment and every question and every case request. I really appreciate the support, and I'm so glad that we can get these stories out there together. But without any further ado, let's go ahead and get into the episode. Stevie Danielle Bates was born on December 29, 1992, in Manhattan, New York, to parents Vivian and Stephen. When Stevie was young, her parents went their separate ways, and her mother, Vivian, eventually married her stepfather, Daryl. Stevie was one of 5 total children in her family. She had 2 brothers, Darnell and Daryl Jr., and 2 sisters, Symphony and Sharina. Growing up, Stevie was incredibly bright and eager to learn from the time she was learning to walk. She excelled at school throughout her childhood and was always enrolled in gifted programs where she absolutely thrived. In 2007, she was admitted to the Bronx High School of Science, a prestigious STEM school in the northwest area of the Bronx. The school has graduated 8 Nobel Prize-winning alumni since its founding, and in 2020 was ranked by Newsweek at number 4 out of the 5,000 best STEM high schools in the country, among many other high honors. Stevie graduated from the Bronx High School of Science in 2010 as a National Achievement Scholar and was accepted to the University of Arizona at Tucson with a full-ride scholarship. Ultimately, however, she decided that she wanted to stay closer to home, and she ended up taking some time off from school. Between 2010 and 2011, Stevie faced unthinkable trauma and grief when she lost one of her friends to an overdose, and soon after, lost another friend who had died by suicide. After this, she became detached and struggled with depression. According to her older sister, Symphony, there was a period of time when Stevie wasn't eating, bathing, or taking care of herself at all. On top of this, the bubbly and family-oriented Stevie withdrew from those closest to her for quite some time. But Stevie pushed through, and in September 2011, she enrolled at Hunter College in New York to pursue a degree in studio art on a full-ride scholarship. An adventurous person with an eclectic mix of interests and hobbies, Stevie was passionate about music and dancing, and she loved film and literature. She was an outspoken activist, and this passion came to life during an assignment for her political science class in November 2011. For the assignment, Stevie began attending protests at Occupy Wall Street, a movement protesting income inequality. She became far more invested than she originally intended, and she found herself living at the tent encampment at Zuccotti Park. There is actually a photograph of Stevie in November 2011, talking on the phone and looking distraught after the tent encampment was ordered to be taken down. It was during the Occupy Wall Street protests that Stevie met a man named Brandon Klosterman, a 29-year-old who lived a fairly nomadic lifestyle. At that time, he was in the beginning stages of recovering from a heroin addiction, and he was receiving treatment at Bellevue Hospital in New York. Soon after meeting, Stevie and Brandon began a relationship. Stevie's mother, Vivian, was fairly open about not being fond of him, primarily because he was 10 years older than Stevie. Brandon frequently stayed in abandoned buildings, and Stevie would often stay with him. It's possible that he was still in active addiction. However, it has never been confirmed whether or not Stevie participated in any drug use of any kind. This did, however, become another period in Stevie's life where she became distant and withdrew into herself. She became less and less interested in school and had started forming a new group of friends. She had even decided not to enroll in classes for the spring 2012 semester. By March of 2012, Stevie and Brandon had broken up, although, based on Facebook messages, they were still in communication after the split. In mid-April 2012, Stevie attended a concert at the Beacon Theater, where she met up with a new group of friends. During the show, the friends invited Stevie to join them on a cross-country road trip, and within just a few days, Stevie and 5 friends left Manhattan in a van, heading to a friend's farm in California. Although the original plan was to travel nearly 3,000 miles across the country, there has never been any confirmation that Stevie and her friends actually made it to California. Throughout the trip, Stevie made sure to keep in contact with her mother, even though she'd lost her phone and had to make use of her friends' cell phones to check in. Less than a week into the road trip, the van the group was traveling in broke down in North Carolina on April 23rd, and Stevie called her mom to let her know. Still eager to get to California, the group left the van behind and made their way to the bus station. On April 26, 2012, Stevie called her mom from a bus station in Hot Springs, Arkansas. Vivian recalled that Stevie seemed tired and overall just exhausted with the road trip and ready to go back home. She offered to buy Stevie a bus ticket back to New York, and Stevie agreed. While her friends continued on for California, Stevie boarded a different bus to make her way home. On April 27th, Stevie called her mom around 8 p.m. from a bus station in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, her last layover before she returned to New York. When Vivian offered to pick her up from the Manhattan Port Authority the next morning, Stevie declined and told her mom that she would be meeting up with her ex-boyfriend, Brandon, to gather some of her belongings before coming home. The plan for when Stevie returned home was for her to move in with her mom in her newly renovated house in Yonkers. This was the last time Vivian spoke to her daughter. Stevie was due to return to Manhattan around 6 a.m. on April 28, 2012. Vivian expected that she would hear from Stevie later in the day, or even the next day, when she planned to return to Vivian's home in Yonkers. But April 30th rolled around, and there was still no word from Stevie. Vivian and Daryl began making calls to everyone they could think of in the hopes of hearing from their daughter. They also called Stevie's older sister, Sharina, hoping that Stevie had gone to her house in Brooklyn, but Sharina hadn't heard from or seen Stevie. A few days after she last spoke with Stevie, Vivian decided to go out and start searching on her own. While searching around Union Square, where Stevie would often hang out with her friends, Vivian ran into a familiar face, Brandon Klosterman, and what he told her was unsettling. Brandon claimed he hadn't spoken with or seen Stevie in person since before she left on her cross-country road trip. At this point in time, Vivian had no confirmation that Stevie had ever arrived back in New York. A week after she had last spoken with Stevie over the phone, Vivian contacted the bus station in Pittsburgh where her daughter had last called her from, to find out if she had in fact boarded the bus to New York that day. The station agreed to review their surveillance footage, but it would take a few days. At her wit's end, Vivian made a desperate call to the NYPD to file a missing persons report for her daughter. But the NYPD told her that without confirmation of Stevie's arrival in New York, they couldn't file a missing persons report for her. They also told her that because Stevie was 19, she could come and go as she pleased. The NYPD then recommended that Vivian contact the NYC Port Authority, where Stevie was supposed to have arrived on April 28, 2012. And this ends up sending Vivian in circles, trying to reach out to authorities across multiple states, none of them seeming willing to help her find her daughter. When Vivian contacted the NYC Port Authority, they recommended that she call the Pennsylvania Port Authority, where Stevie was when she last called. The Pennsylvania Port Authority, however, told her to contact the bus station in Arkansas, where Stevie purchased a ticket to return to New York. The bus station in Hot Springs, Arkansas, was able to confirm that Stevie boarded the bus to New York, and they redirected Vivian back to the Pennsylvania Port Authority. This time, the Pennsylvania Port Authority told her to contact Pennsylvania police. The Pennsylvania Police Department was finally able to confirm that Stevie had boarded the bus to New York. They then told Vivian to contact the NYC Port Authority. And then, the NYC Port Authority redirected Vivian back to the NYPD. But the NYPD still refused to accept the missing persons report for Stevie, claiming that because Vivian was a resident of Yonkers, she would need to file the report with the Yonkers Police Department. This was despite the fact that Stevie herself was not a resident of Yonkers, and her last address was actually listed in Brooklyn. After days of trying to reach out for help from the authorities, Vivian finally decided to file the report with the Yonkers Police Department on May 9, 2012. Police attempted to verify Stevie's arrival in New York by reviewing surveillance from the Manhattan Port Authority, but there was no sign of Stevie on the footage at the time she was due to return. After rethinking their strategy, police considered that Stevie's bus could have been delayed that morning. so they tried reviewing footage from a wider time frame. It wasn't until May 19, 2012, that the Yonkers police were able to confirm that Stevie did in fact arrive at the Manhattan Port Authority on April 28, 2012. In the surveillance footage, Stevie could be seen coming up the escalator at 8:51 a.m., turning toward another escalator, and then turning around to head for the Port Authority lobby. After that, there was no known surveillance footage that tracked Stevie's movements through the city after she left the bus terminal. Vivian was in the dark again. After confirming Stevie's arrival in New York, Vivian attempted multiple times to have her case transferred to the NYPD, but once again they refused. Vivian, Daryl, and the rest of Stevie's family were essentially left on their own. There had been no activity on Stevie's Facebook or bank account since April 26, 2012. There had been no word from her, and there was no surveillance or traffic cams that spotted her after she left the bus terminal just before 9 a.m. on April 28th. When Vivian discovered that Stevie was not listed in NYPD's missing persons database, she refiled the report with the 77th Precinct on May 25, 2012, and Vivian continued her search efforts with the help of family and friends. Brandon Klosterman was not questioned by police for the first time until late May 2012, a month after Stevie went missing. It was also learned that he had since deleted all of his Facebook messages with Stevie. Whether this is to do with their breakup in March of 2012, or to do with Stevie's subsequent disappearance after her return from a road trip, we'll never know. Police soon publicly stated that Brandon was not a person of interest in Stevie's case. By late summer 2012, Stevie Bates' case had already effectively gone cold. Sometime after Stevie went missing, a video surfaced of her on a train in New York, and initially it was thought that this video could help lead to Stevie's whereabouts. It's unknown who exactly is filming or what their relationship to Stevie was, if any. Seated next to Stevie in the video was a man who looked incredibly similar to Brandon. When Stevie got up, the man followed after her, and he was followed by the person filming. It later came out that the video was filmed around April 11, 2012, several days before Stevie left New York, and more than 2 weeks before she went missing, so it likely has no connection to her disappearance or the events leading up to it. On September 18, 2020, construction workers excavating a site on Cypress Avenue in Queens made a disturbing discovery. As the excavator dug 5 feet into the ground, it dislodged a rolled-up blanket. It gave the workers pause when they noticed something falling out of it. When they looked closer, they realized that they had just discovered a set of bones. Discovered wrapped up in the old blanket was a human skull, chin, jaw, and femur. The site was only about 11 miles away from the Port Authority where Stevie had arrived by bus 8 years earlier, on April 28, 2012. In early 2021, 9 years after her disappearance, the remains were confirmed to be those of Stevie Bates. It was later learned that the construction site where Stevie's remains were found was formerly an abandoned building, where Brandon Klosterman had allegedly been squatting at the time of Stevie's disappearance. In an interview with ABC7 New York in May 2021, Vivian said that that was where Stevie had met Brandon the day she disappeared. Despite the discovery of Stevie's remains and the possible connections that Brandon had to the location, he was never named a person of interest in her disappearance or death. In fact, there has never been a formal announcement of any persons of interest or suspects. Stevie Bates was an absolute force and a shining light in this world. She was enigmatic, vivacious, and driven to make her mark on the world, and that chance was stolen from her. Multiple authorities sat in complicity and allowed her story to fall into the shadows. Never stop telling Stevie's story. Never let her flame burn out. All sources for this episode are listed in the show notes. Please be sure to leave a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you'd like to request a case for me to cover, there's a link in the show notes for the case request form. You can follow the podcast on Twitter @CrimeAgainPod, on Instagram @CrimeAgainPodcast, and on TikTok @CrimeAgainPodcast. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode of Crime and Crime Again.